The marble floors of the Grandview Hotel gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in the lobby, her phone pressed to her ear. Her other hand clutched her clutch purse so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Around her, elegantly dressed guests moved seamlessly through the bustling space, but Sarah felt as though the world was closing in on her. "You're not coming?" she whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible over the gentle jazz playing from hidden speakers. She already knew the answer, had known it for the past 3 minutes of listening to her fiancé's excuses about a last-minute work emergency, about how sorry he was, about how he'd make it up to her. David's voice crackled through the line with what sounded like genuine regret, but Sarah had learned to hear the undertone of indifference that had become all too familiar over the past year. "I'm really sorry, Sarah. I know this reunion is important to you, but Mr. Harrison just sprung this on me. The client is flying in tonight, and I can't." She ended the call without responding. What was there to say? This was the third event in 4 months that David had bailed on, always with a work-related excuse, always delivered with that practiced apologetic tone that had long since ceased to feel authentic. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. The reunion. Tonight, 7 p.m., room 412. She glanced down at the cream-colored dress she'd purchased 3 weeks ago, an elegant, understated piece that she'd convinced herself was both beautiful and professional. Her hair had been styled into soft waves by a salon professional just hours ago. Her makeup was flawless. Everything about her exterior screamed success and confidence. But inside, Sarah felt like she was crumbling. The Westfield High School class of 2005 reunion. 20 years since graduation. 20 years since she'd been the shy, bookish girl who nobody particularly noticed. She'd worked hard to become someone different, someone accomplished. She was a marketing director at a prestigious firm. She owned a condo in the city. She'd built a life that, on paper, looked enviable. But the moment she'd received the invitation 2 months ago, all of that confidence had evaporated, replaced by the teenage insecurity that apparently never really went away. The problem wasn't just that David wasn't coming. The problem was what his absence represented. It meant walking into that ballroom alone, answering questions about her fiancé with vague descriptions, having to sit at a table with people who would inevitably compare their lives to hers, measuring and judging. And worst of all, there was Jennifer Hartley. Jennifer Hartley, who had been voted most likely to succeed back in high school. Jennifer Hartley, who had married a hedge fund manager and spent her days planning charity galas. Jennifer Hartley, who had always made it clear that she thought Sarah was destined for mediocrity. There had been a specific moment in 11th grade when Jennifer, surrounded by her usual entourage, had said loudly enough for Sarah to hear, "Sarah Mitchell? Please." She'd probably end up as some office assistant somewhere, if she's lucky. The irony was that Sarah had proven Jennifer wrong. She'd gone to a good university, climbed the corporate ladder, built a successful career. But she'd done it alone, quietly, without the safety net of a prestigious family name or an attractive husband to validate her existence. And now, on the eve of the reunion, the one thing that might have silenced Jennifer's inevitable snide remarks, a devoted partner. Proof that Sarah's life wasn't just professional success, but personal fulfillment was absent. Sarah walked toward the hotel's main seating area, her heels clicking against the marble with each step. She needed to think. She needed to find a way to salvage this evening. She could call her friend Lisa, see if she'd come as her plus one. But Lisa was out of town, and even if she weren't, showing up with a female friend would somehow feel like an admission of failure. The reunion culture of 2025 still operated under antiquated rules where a woman, arriving without a man, was automatically seen as lacking, as unsuccessful in love if not in life. She sat down heavily on one of the plush lobby chairs, her gaze fixed on the ornate fountain in the center of the space. The water cascaded gently, and Sarah found herself staring at it as if the answer to her dilemma might somehow be hidden in those cascading droplets. That's when she noticed him. He was standing at the concierge desk, a tall man with dark skin and kind eyes, wearing a well-fitted charcoal suit. He was asking the concierge about nearby restaurants, his voice warm and unhurried. There was something about his demeanor that caught Sarah's attention, a quiet confidence, an ease with himself that suggested he didn't spend his time worrying about what others thought of him. He was, objectively speaking, handsome in the way that comes from genuine self-assurance rather than aesthetic perfection. Sarah found herself staring, not in a romantic way, exactly, but in the way one might regard a person who seemed to exist in a different realm entirely, a realm where social anxiety and the fear of judgment had no dominion. The man turned away from the concierge and seemed to sense her gaze. He glanced in her direction, his eyes meeting hers for a moment. Sarah quickly looked away, embarrassed at being caught staring. But something had shifted in that brief moment of eye contact. A thought had formed, wild and desperate and absolutely ridiculous. Before she could talk herself out of it, Sarah stood up and walked toward him. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her throat. What was she about to do? What was she thinking? The man was still standing near the concierge desk, now looking at his phone. Sarah approached him slowly, her mind racing. Up close, she could see the details she'd missed from across the room. The careful attention to grooming, the expensive watch, the kind of understated elegance that suggested he was someone of substance. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice smaller than she'd intended. The man looked up, and his expression shifted to one of polite curiosity. "Yes." Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. This was insane. This was absolutely, completely insane. She was about to make a fool of herself in the middle of a hotel lobby in front of a complete stranger. And yet, something about the kindness in his eyes, something about the way he was looking at her with genuine interest rather than judgment, gave her the courage to continue. "This is going to sound incredibly strange," Sarah began, her mouth dry, "and you have every right to walk away from me right now. But I'm in a difficult situation, and I'm about to ask you something that no rational person would agree to." The man's expression shifted to one of intrigued concern. He set his phone down and gave her his full attention. "Okay," he said, his voice warm and patient. "I'm listening." Sarah took a breath. The words tumbled out of her mouth before she could stop them. "My fiancé was supposed to accompany me to my high school reunion tonight. He just canceled on me a last-minute work emergency. The reunion is in about 20 minutes, and I'm supposed to walk into a ballroom with a +1. And instead, I'm going to show up alone. And all of these people I haven't seen in 20 years are going to judge me for it. So I was wondering." She paused, watching his face for signs of alarm or ridicule. There were none. "I was wondering if you would be willing to pretend to be my husband for just a few hours. Just for tonight. I know this is insane, and you don't know me, and you have absolutely no reason to say yes, but—" She trailed off, waiting for the inevitable rejection. Instead, the man tilted his head slightly, studying her face as though he were trying to read something written there. After a moment that felt like an eternity, a slow smile spread across his face. "That's definitely the most creative proposal I've ever received," he said, and there was amusement in his voice, but not mockery. "But before I answer, I have a question. Are you in danger? Is someone threatening you? Is this reunion situation actually about something more serious?" Sarah was surprised by the question. "No," she said honestly. "No one is threatening me. It's just social anxiety, I guess. Fear of judgment. Vanity, probably. I work so hard to appear successful, and the one thing that could complete that appearance tonight is missing." The man nodded slowly, as though her honest answer had given him information he needed. "My name is Marcus," he said, "and I have to admit, I'm intrigued. Also, I'm in town for a business conference. I have no plans for tonight, and the universe has a weird sense of timing. So yes, I'll do it." Sarah blinked. "Really?" "Really," Marcus confirmed. "But with two conditions." "Anything," Sarah said immediately. "First, tell me your name and give me a basic overview of what I should know. Your job, your interests, how long we've supposedly been together. That sort of thing. I want to do this well." "Of course," Sarah breathed. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a marketing director at—" "Wait," Marcus interrupted gently. "Not here. We have 20 minutes, which isn't much time. Tell me as we walk to the elevator. What's your second condition?" "Second condition," Marcus said, his eyes meeting hers with surprising seriousness, "is that you promise me that after tonight, if anyone from that reunion tries to contact you because of something I do or say, you'll be honest with them about what happened. I'm not interested in deceiving people long term. Just for tonight." Sarah nodded. "I promise." "Then let's go be a happily married couple for a few hours," Marcus said, extending his arm to her. The ballroom doors opened before them, and Sarah felt Marcus's hand slip down to her lower back in a gesture that was both reassuring and convincingly intimate. The movement was so natural, so perfectly timed, that for a moment, Sarah forgot this was an act. She allowed herself to lean into it, drawing strength from his presence. The Westfield High School class of 2005 reunion had transformed the grand ballroom into a shrine to nostalgia. Gold and blue, the school colors draped across every surface. A massive banner reading 20 years of Westfield pride hung above the stage where a DJ was setting up. Round tables were scattered throughout, each decorated with centerpieces containing photos from their graduation year. The room was filled with the sound of laughter, excited greetings, and the particular energy that comes when people confront their younger selves after 2 decades of living. Sarah recognized several faces immediately. There was Tom Richardson, who'd been the quarterback and still had the physique to prove it, though his hairline had retreated somewhat. Near the bar stood the Martinez twins, who'd apparently started a successful tech company together. And there, by the entrance to the main hall, was Jennifer Hartley. Jennifer looked exactly as Sarah had imagined she would: perfectly coiffed blonde hair, an expertly tailored designer dress, jewelry that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment. She was surrounded by the usual entourage, women she'd been friends with in high school, all of them still radiating the particular confidence of people who'd never doubted their right to take up space in the world. Jennifer's eyes landed on Sarah, and Sarah watched as her old nemesis's expression shifted. There was the initial flicker of recognition, followed by a careful calculation as Jennifer took in Sarah's appearance, the elegant dress, the styled hair, and most importantly, the tall, attractive man at her side, whose hand was still positioned at the small of her back. Sarah felt Marcus sense the moment her body had tensed. He leaned down slightly, his lips near her ear, and whispered, "You okay?" The simple question, delivered with genuine concern, grounded her. "Fine," she whispered back. "Just spotted someone from high school. The blonde woman giving us the once-over?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah nodded, impressed by his perceptiveness. "Then we should probably go say hello," Marcus said. "Might as well get the potentially awkward encounter out of the way early." Before Sarah could protest, Marcus was gently steering her in Jennifer's direction. Her heart raced as they approached, but Marcus's calm demeanor was contagious. He moved with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove, whose self-worth wasn't contingent on anyone else's approval. "Jennifer?" Sarah called out, and Jennifer's head turned immediately, as if she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "It's Sarah Mitchell. We were in the same year." Jennifer's smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to seem genuine, cool enough to maintain distance. "Sarah, oh my God, of course I remember you. You look different. Good different, I mean." The backhanded compliment was delivered with such smoothness that only someone familiar with Jennifer's particular brand of manipulation would catch it. "Thank you," Sarah said, refusing to rise to the bait. "This is Marcus, my husband." "Marcus, this is Jennifer Hartley. Well, Jennifer something else now, I imagine?" "Hartley Windsor," Jennifer corrected, holding up her left hand to display an engagement ring that was indeed impressive, though Sarah noticed it was also slightly ostentatious. "I got married 3 years ago. To Chad Windsor. He's the senior partner at his father's firm. You probably know of him." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus extended his hand to Jennifer with a warm smile. "Jennifer, it's a pleasure to meet you. Sarah's spoken very highly of your ambition and drive. She said you were always the type to set your sights high and achieve exactly what you wanted." It was a masterful compliment. It validated Jennifer's self-image while making it clear that Sarah had been thinking about her, had been impressed enough to mention her to her husband. Sarah watched as Jennifer's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of genuine pleasure crossing her face before she caught herself. "How thoughtful of you to say that," Jennifer said, and there was a note of uncertainty in her voice that hadn't been there before. "And what do you do, Marcus?" "I'm in architecture," Marcus said easily, which was technically true. Sarah had learned in the elevator that he worked in urban design and architecture. "I work on sustainable building projects, mostly in developing regions. It's interesting work, though it requires a lot of travel." Sarah listened as Marcus spoke, and she felt something shift inside her. He wasn't lying, wasn't performing in some elaborate fantasy. He was just being himself, and his version of himself was impressive without trying to be. There was no arrogance in his tone, no need to make himself sound more important than he was. "How do you two know each other?" Jennifer asked, turning to Sarah with renewed interest. "Surely you didn't go to Westfield?" "We met at a professional conference about 4 years ago," Sarah said, the story flowing naturally because it felt true in spirit, even if the details were invented. Marcus was giving a presentation on sustainable design in corporate spaces, and I was working on a campaign for a green energy initiative. We started talking, and she smiled at Marcus, and he squeezed her hand. And I realized I'd be an idiot to let her walk away at the end of the day. Marcus finished, looking at Sarah with an expression of such warm regard that Jennifer actually seemed to soften. "That's so romantic," Jennifer said, and there was genuine feeling in her voice now. "Chad and I met at a country club mixer. Much less interesting, I'm afraid. We've been engaged for 2 years, and honestly, some days I wonder if we're really right for each other. But everyone expects." She caught herself, clearly realizing she was oversharing. "Anyway, you should come to our table. We're all catching up with our old friends." Sarah and Marcus exchanged a glance. Going to Jennifer's table felt like walking into the lion's den, but Sarah also understood that this was important. If she could navigate this group with grace, she could navigate anyone. The evening took on a surreal quality as Sarah moved through the reunion with Marcus at her side. What she dreaded became, in many ways, enjoyable. Marcus had a gift for putting people at ease. He asked thoughtful questions, listened to people's stories with genuine interest, and had the remarkable ability to make every person he spoke to feel like the most important person in the room. With Tom Richardson, he discussed the business challenges of opening a personal training studio. With the Martinez twins, he engaged in an intelligent conversation about the scalability challenges of their tech platform, offering insights that suggested he actually understood their industry. With the group of women Sarah had always felt slightly inadequate around, he complimented their various accomplishments while somehow making it clear that Sarah's achievements were equally worthy of admiration. At the dinner table, as salads were being served, Marcus turned to Sarah and said, loud enough for the others to hear, "Remember when you pitched that campaign to Richardson Industries and they rejected it, and you were devastated? And then 6 months later, they came back and asked you to do it your way, and it became one of your biggest successes?" Sarah blinked, confused, because she'd never mentioned that to him. But then she understood. He was creating a narrative, building their false history in a way that highlighted her professional accomplishments. "Oh God, yes," one of the women at the table, Rebecca, whose last name Sarah could never remember, said eagerly. "You had to tell us about that. That was huge for you." "She doesn't like to talk about her wins," Marcus said, his tone affectionate. "She's always focused on what comes next, what could be better. It's one of the things I love about her, but it also means she doesn't give herself enough credit for what she's already accomplished." Sarah found herself being seen in a new way, not through the lens of high school hierarchies or social anxiety, but through Marcus's perspective as someone worthy of admiration, someone whose career trajectory was impressive, someone whose partnership was enviable. As the evening progressed, there were moments when Sarah almost forgot that Marcus was playing a role. He asked her about her day with genuine curiosity. He seemed to remember the details she told him in the elevator, her recent promotion to senior director, her interest in urban agriculture projects, and he wove these details into conversations in ways that made her sound accomplished and interesting. When Jennifer made a comment about how nice it must be to have a husband who understood her career ambitions, Marcus said, "Sarah doesn't need me to understand her career. She's more accomplished than I am in her field. What I do understand is that she's exceptional, and I'm lucky to be part of her life." It was such a simple statement, but it landed like a revelation. Sarah found herself staring at him for a moment too long, and he caught her eye and smiled, a smile that seemed to contain layers of warmth and something else she couldn't quite identify. Later, as they slow danced during the dance portion of the evening, a song Sarah recognized from her graduation year, "The Way You Look Tonight," Marcus held her loosely but with clear affection. "You're doing great," he said softly. "Jennifer actually seems to be reconsidering some of her previous judgments about you." The coffee shop on Fifth Avenue was nearly empty on a Saturday morning, the kind of quiet that invited long conversations and lingering silences. Sarah sat across from Marcus at a small table near the window, 2 cups of cappuccino cooling between them. It had been 3 days since the reunion, 3 days since she'd exchanged numbers with Marcus, just in case. 3 days of telling herself she wouldn't text him, followed by 3 days of failing to keep that promise. His first text had come on Thursday morning. "Hope you're having a better day than the one you imagined before the reunion." She'd responded within minutes. "Infinitely better. Thank you again for last night." It was truly above and beyond. Then, that afternoon, "Coffee sometime? I'm in town until Monday, and I'd like to see you again." As friends? The qualifier, as friends, had stung slightly, and Sarah recognized that as a problem. They weren't friends. They barely knew each other. And yet, she'd agreed immediately, and here they were. "Tell me something true about yourself," Marcus said, stirring his coffee absently. "Something you didn't tell me on Thursday night, because you were too busy being Jennifer Hartley's vision of success." Sarah smiled at the directness of the question. "That's quite an opening." "I know," Marcus said, "but I find I'm not interested in surface conversations with you. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, I want to know the real Sarah, not the professional accomplishment version of Sarah." Sarah set down her cup and took a moment to consider the question. "Okay," she said finally. "Something true. I hate my job." Marcus leaned back, clearly not expecting that answer. "Hated how?" "I'm good at it," Sarah said, the words tumbling out now that she'd started. "I've been promoted twice in 5 years." My boss respects me. My salary is excellent. But every morning when I wake up, I feel this weight in my chest because I have to go spend 8 to 10 hours doing something that feels meaningless. I create marketing campaigns for corporations that don't actually care about the causes they're ostensibly supporting. I help them seem progressive while they maintain the status quo. And I'm very good at it, which somehow makes it worse. "Why do you stay?" Marcus asked. "Because I'm scared," Sarah said, meeting his eyes. "I'm scared that if I leave, I'll fail. I'm scared that all the years I spent building this career will have been for nothing. I'm scared that without the job title and the salary, I'm just nobody. That's probably pathetic to admit to a stranger." "You're not admitting it to a stranger," Marcus said quietly. "You're admitting it to someone who might actually understand what that fear feels like." He leaned forward slightly, and Sarah noticed that his demeanor had shifted. There was a vulnerability in his expression, now that hadn't been as visible at the reunion. "I grew up poor," Marcus continued. "My mother was a nurse. My father was largely absent. We lived in neighborhoods where people looked at boys who looked like me and already had our futures written. I was told I would either be a criminal or a statistic. I was told that success would require not just being good at what I did, but being twice as good as anyone else, and even then, people would assume I'd been given advantages." He paused, running his thumb along the rim of his cup. "So I became obsessed with proving them wrong. I worked harder than anyone in my university program. I took unpaid internships. I built my resume meticulously. And by the time I'd achieved professional success, I realized I'd built my entire identity around external validation. I was successful because it was a way of fighting back against people's expectations. And that's not a sustainable way to live. What changed?" Sarah asked. "Nothing," Marcus said with a rueful smile. "That's the thing. I'm still operating from that place a lot of the time. But I became aware of it about 3 years ago. And I've been slowly trying to understand what I actually want, separate from what I think I should want or what I think will prove something to other people." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. This man, this stranger, was articulating something she'd never been able to put into words about her own life. "So," Marcus said, "I understand the fear. And I also understand that the only way through it is to do the thing you're afraid of anyway." Over the next week, Sarah and Marcus met several times. First for coffee, then for dinner, then for a long walk through the park on Sunday afternoon. With each meeting, the conversation went deeper. Sarah told him about her childhood, her parents' disappointment when she chose marketing instead of law, her mother's subtle comments about how she still hadn't given them grandchildren, her father's confusion about why she remained unmarried for so long when she was attractive enough. She told him about David. And as she talked about her fiancé, she heard herself describing a relationship that had become more of a habit than a genuine partnership. David was kind enough, successful enough, handsome enough. He fit the template of what a good life was supposed to look like. But he wasn't interested in who she was. He was interested in what she represented, a successful woman who looked good on his arm, who managed her own life so he didn't have to manage much at all. "He called me 3 times while I was having coffee with you yesterday," Sarah found herself saying on Wednesday evening, as they sat in Marcus's hotel room, a confession that surprised both of them with its implications. 3 times. And each time I didn't answer, I felt guilty. And then I realized that I've never actually worried about missing his calls before. I'd been relieved when he's too busy to see me, because it meant I could do what I wanted. Marcus was sitting on the edge of the bed, Sarah on the chair across from him. There was a careful distance maintained between them, a boundary that felt increasingly fragile. "What are you saying?" Marcus asked gently. "I'm saying that I think I've been lying to myself," Sarah said. "I've been engaged to a man I don't really love, calling it commitment when it's actually just comfort. And then you appeared, and in a single evening, I felt more seen and valued than I have in years. And now, she paused, struggling with the next part. Now I'm terrified. Of what? Marcus asked. Of a lot of things, Sarah admitted. Of what this means. Of whether what I'm feeling is real or just a reaction to David's absence. Of the fact that you live on the other side of the country and you're leaving on Monday. Of the possibility that I'll end my engagement for what turns out to be an illusion. Marcus stood and walked over to her, extending his hand. Sarah took it, and he pulled her to her feet and into his arms. It was the first time they'd touched since the reunion, and the contact felt like the most natural thing in the world. They held each other in silence for a long moment. I have something to tell you, Marcus said, still holding her. And I need you to listen without interrupting, okay? Sarah nodded against his chest. These past few days have been, he paused, searching for the right word. Transformative. I wasn't looking for this. I came to this city for a conference, and I met a desperate woman in a hotel lobby. And I said yes to something insane because something about her honesty called to me. But what's happened between us since then, it's real. I know it feels fast. I know you're engaged. I know there are about 1,000 practical reasons why this doesn't make sense. But Sarah, I need you to know that I see you. I'm not going to pretend I don't have feelings for you, or that I don't want this to continue. Sarah pulled back slightly to look at his face. But, Marcus continued, I won't be your rebound. I won't be the guy you choose because you're running away from David. If this is going to happen between us, I need you to be sure that you're choosing me because you want to, not because you're rejecting someone else. I need you to do the work of understanding what went wrong with your engagement, what you actually want out of life, who you are when you're not trying to be anyone's anything. And that's going to take time. How much time? Sarah asked, and she could hear the desperation in her voice. I don't know, Marcus said, but I'm going to be in New York for the next 2 weeks for work. After that, I'm going back to Portland. We can see each other while I'm here. We can talk. We can figure out what this is. But I'm not going to ask you to leave David while you're still confused about what you want. Sarah felt tears starting and didn't bother to stop them. I know what I want, she said. You want to feel like someone cares about you, Marcus said, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. And that's valid. But that's not the same as knowing what you want. Those are two different things. That night, Sarah drove home to the condo she shared with David, feeling like a ghost moving through a space that had suddenly become unfamiliar. David was in the living room, working on his laptop, and he barely looked up when she entered. Hey, he said distractedly. How was your week? We need to talk, Sarah said, and the words came out steadier than she felt. David set down his laptop with visible annoyance. About what? About us, Sarah said. About whether this is actually working. About the fact that I can't remember the last time you asked me how my day was with genuine interest. About the fact that you've canceled on me 3 times in the past month, and each time I felt relieved rather than disappointed. David stood up, running a hand through his hair. Sarah, is this because I couldn't go to your reunion? Because I apologize for that. I told you it was a work thing. 2 weeks felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. Sarah had fallen into a rhythm with Marcus that felt almost dangerously natural breakfast, together before he went to his conference sessions. Lunch meetings where they'd steal time in quiet corners of the city. Evenings spent in her apartment or his hotel room, learning each other's stories. Building something that felt increasingly real and increasingly fragile. But today was Friday, and tomorrow morning Marcus would board a plane back to Portland. They stood on the observation deck of the Empire State Building, a cliché that Sarah would have normally found ridiculous, but which felt appropriate given the weight of the moment. The city sprawled beneath them in all its complicated beauty. "I've been thinking about something all week," Marcus said, his eyes fixed on the skyline. "And I need to say it before I leave, because I won't have the courage once I'm 3,000 miles away." Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd been waiting for this moment with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "I love you," Marcus said simply. "I know it's fast. I know we've known each other for less than a month. I know this is objectively insane. But Sarah, I'm in love with you. And I need you to know that before I get on that plane." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Part of her wanted to say it back immediately, to seal the feeling with words. But another part of her, the part that had been burned before, the part that had lived a lie with David for 3 years, made her pause. "I care about you deeply," she said carefully. "But I need to be honest with you, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you sure you're not in love with the idea of me? The idea of a woman who chose you, who was brave enough to ask for help, who—" "I'm not in love with an idea," Marcus interrupted, finally turning to face her. "I'm in love with a woman who hates her job but is too scared to leave it, who has spent 20 years trying to be someone else's version of success, who cries during sad movies but tries to hide it, who laughs at terrible jokes because she doesn't want to hurt people's feelings, who is brilliant and ambitious and lonely and so worth loving. That's not an idea, Sarah. That's you. Then why are you leaving?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Because I live in Portland," Marcus said, and there was pain in his voice. "I have a job, a lease, a life there. And because," he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts, "and because I meant what I said 2 weeks ago. I won't be your rebound. Not because I don't believe you have genuine feelings for me, but because I need to know that you're choosing me for the right reasons. You just ended a 3-year engagement. You just admitted that you hate your job and don't know who you are outside of it. You're in a state of transition, Sarah. A beautiful, necessary transition. But it's a transition. And I need you to complete that transition before we can really know if what we have is sustainable." "How long?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "I don't know," Marcus said. "But I'll come back to visit. We'll talk on the phone. We'll FaceTime. But I'm not going to ask you to follow me across the country. And I'm not going to rearrange my entire life based on something that's only been real for 2 weeks. That wouldn't be fair to either of us." "This feels like you're breaking up with me," Sarah said. "It feels like that," Marcus acknowledged, "because it kind of is. But it's also not. We're not ending anything, Sarah. We're just pausing, creating space for you to figure out who you want to be, and for me to figure out if I'm capable of being in a relationship that's not based on proving something to the world." The conversation continued as they rode the elevator back down. As they walked through Central Park, as they sat in a quiet restaurant and picked at food neither of them really wanted. Marcus talked about his job, about the projects he was working on in Portland, about his desire to start his own firm focused on community-centered development. Sarah listened. Understanding that he was telling her these things, she would understand that his life had substance and direction, that he wasn't just running back to Portland to escape what had become complicated. "I want to ask you something," Sarah said as they sat across from each other, the remains of dinner between them. "And I need you to answer honestly." "Okay," Marcus said. "Are you scared that if I take time to figure myself out, I might figure out that I don't actually want you? That I might realize this was just a moment of weakness and vulnerability, and that when I'm stronger, I won't need you anymore?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "I'm terrified of that, which is exactly why I need to do this. Because if I let you follow me, if I ask you to make your life revolve around me before you've even figured out what your own life should be, then I'm becoming another voice telling you who to be. Another person asking you to perform a version of yourself for their benefit. And I don't want to be that person. That night, Sarah didn't go back to her apartment. She stayed with Marcus in his hotel room, and they made love with an intensity that came from knowing it might be the last time for a while. Afterward, they lay in the dark, and Sarah found herself speaking about things she'd never articulated before. "I think I spent my entire life trying to be what other people needed me to be," she said into the darkness. "I was the good daughter, the ambitious employee, the perfect fiancé. And I was so focused on being those things that I never asked myself what I actually wanted. When David forgot to pick me up from the airport last month, I didn't get angry. I just rearranged my plans to fit his convenience. When my mother made comments about my career being unfulfilling, I defended my choices, but never actually disagreed with her assessment. I performed confidence while feeling like a fraud. And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I'm terrified," Sarah said. "Because if I'm not performing, if I'm not trying to be someone else's version of success, who am I? What if I figure that out and I don't like the answer? What if I'm fundamentally a shallow person who only felt fulfilled because I was being validated?" "You're not a shallow person," Marcus said. "But you need to find out who you are without anyone else's validation. That's what this time apart is for." Morning came too quickly. Sarah helped Marcus pack, the task feeling unbearably domestic and final. At the airport, they held each other for a long time. "Promise me something," Marcus said, as they stood near the security checkpoint. "What?" Sarah asked. "Promise me that you won't make decisions based on what you think I want. If you decide you don't want a long-distance relationship, tell me. If you decide you want to stay in your job, tell me. If you figure out that you actually love David and want to get back together with him, tell me. Promise me you'll be honest." "I promise," Sarah said. "And promise me that you'll figure out what you actually want to do with your life. Not what you think you should do. What you actually want." "I promise," Sarah said again. Marcus kissed her one last time before security, and then he turned and walked away. Sarah watched him until he disappeared into the crowd, and then she stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of his absence like a physical thing. The next 3 weeks were the longest of Sarah's life. She threw herself into work with renewed focus, not because she suddenly loved her job, but because it gave her something to do besides miss Marcus. They talked on the phone every evening, and the conversations were sometimes easy and sometimes strained by the distance and the uncertainty of their situation. Her mother called with news that Jennifer Hartley's engagement had been called off. Apparently, Chad Windsor had been having an affair, and Jennifer was devastated. Sarah found herself feeling genuine sympathy rather than schadenfreude, which felt like growth. Her therapist, whom she'd started seeing 2 weeks after Marcus left, finally addressing the underlying anxiety that had plagued her for years, asked her an important question. If Marcus disappeared tomorrow and you never saw him again, would you still want to leave your job? Sarah sat with that question for days before answering. And the answer was yes. Yes, she would still want to leave. Yes, she would still want to figure out who she was. Yes, the changes she wanted to make weren't contingent on Marcus's presence. That realization was both liberating and terrifying. 4 weeks after Marcus left, Sarah went into her boss's office. "I'm giving my notice," she said. "I'll stay for 2 months to help with the transition, but I'm going to be moving on." "I'm surprised," her boss said. "You were just promoted. Where are you going?" "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted. "But I know I need to figure out what I actually want to do, and I can't do that while I'm here." That evening, she called Marcus. "I quit my job," she said before he could even say hello. There was a long pause. "Okay," he said carefully. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," Sarah said, "but also alive. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm making a choice for myself." "I'm proud of you," Marcus said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "But Sarah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it." "Okay," she said, bracing herself. "I miss you," Marcus said. "And I love you. But I'm also figuring some things out here, and I've realized something. I'd been running from commitment because I was scared that if I settled down, if I stopped proving myself, I would disappear. And so I created this narrative where I needed space and time, and I projected that onto you." The community center in the Bronx was nothing like the corporate offices where Sarah had spent the last 5 years of her life. The walls were painted in bright colors by local artists. The floors were warm but clean, and the energy in the space felt purposeful in a way that her previous workplace never had. Sarah stood in the middle of the multi-purpose room, surrounded by blueprints and vision boards, presenting her ideas to the board of directors of the Urban Seeds Initiative. This project is about creating spaces where communities can grow literally and figuratively, Sarah explained, pointing to the architectural renderings. "We're not just building a garden. We're creating an educational hub, a gathering space, a place where people can learn sustainable agriculture practices, connect with their neighbors, and build something together." The board members listened intently. This was Sarah's third project pitch since she'd left her corporate job 3 months ago. She'd spent her severance and savings starting a consulting firm focused on community-centered projects, the exact opposite of the high-profit corporate campaigns she'd been creating for years. The first 2 projects hadn't worked out. The contracts fell through, the timeline shifted, and Sarah had felt the familiar panic of having made a terrible mistake. But instead of retreating to safety, instead of calling her old boss to ask for her job back, she'd kept moving forward. She'd refined her approach, learned from her failures, and accepted that building something meaningful was harder and messier than building something profitable. "This is impressive work," the board chair said. "Tell us about your vision for community engagement." As Sarah answered the question, she felt a familiar presence enter the room. She didn't turn around, but she knew immediately that Marcus had arrived. They'd planned for him to observe the presentation, to give her feedback, but his presence alone was enough to ground her, to remind her that she wasn't doing this alone. The presentation lasted 45 minutes, followed by 20 minutes of questions. When it was finally over, the board chair stood and extended her hand. "We'd like to move forward with this project," she said. "We'll have our legal team draw up a contract. But I want you to know that this is exactly what we've been looking for." Sarah felt a smile spread across her face, a real smile. Not the practiced professional expression she'd perfected over years of corporate presentations. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As she walked out of the community center, Marcus was waiting for her in the lobby. He pulled her into an embrace before she could say anything. "You were incredible," he said. "I was terrified," Sarah laughed, pulling back to look at him. "Did you see my hand shaking during the presentation?" "I did," Marcus said. "And you did it anyway. That's what makes it incredible." They walked to a nearby cafe, ordered coffee, and found a quiet table in the corner. It was here, in the margins of a regular Tuesday, that they finally had the conversation they'd both been building toward. "I have something to tell you," Marcus said, stirring his coffee with deliberate slowness. "And I want you to listen without interrupting until I'm finished." Sarah nodded, preparing herself for what might come next. "I've spent the last 3 months in Portland, trying to figure out who I am outside of ambition and achievement," Marcus continued. "I've been in therapy. I've had long conversations with my mother about why I've been running from commitment. And I've done a lot of thinking about what I actually want my life to look like. And the answer, after all of that work, is simple. I want my life to look like what happens when I'm with you." "Marcus," Sarah started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to move to Portland. I'm not asking you to fit your life around mine. I'm asking you to consider whether you'd be open to building something together, something that's actually grounded in reality rather than fantasy. I've started the process of transferring my work to New York. There's a firm here that's interested in a partnership for community-centered development projects. I could be here full-time in about 6 months. But I need to know if that's something you'd want. You're moving to New York? Sarah asked, her voice small. I'm considering it, Marcus said. But I'm not moving for you, Sarah. I'm moving because the work I want to do is here. The community I want to serve is here. And the opportunities I've been looking for are here. That you're here is an added benefit, not the reason. Sarah felt tears start to form. I was so afraid, she said, that if I became the kind of person I actually wanted to be, if I figured out what made me happy, that I would figure out that you weren't part of that. And then when you left, I had to confront that fear. And I realized something. The work I'm doing now, the life I'm building, it's not dependent on you. But I want you in it. Not because I need you, but because I choose you. That's all I've ever wanted to hear, Marcus said. They sat in that cafe for hours, talking about logistics and dreams, about what a real partnership might look like. They talked about living together, about travel, about Marcus's desire to eventually start his own firm and Sarah's nascent dream of expanding her consulting work to multiple cities. They talked about the future in a way that felt grounded and real, rather than romantic and fantastical. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a small gallery in Brooklyn, looking at photographs of the community garden project she'd designed. The Urban Seeds Initiative had launched successfully, and the photos documented the transformation, a vacant lot becoming a thriving garden, community members of all ages working together, children discovering where food came from. Marcus stood beside her, one hand in hers, the other gesturing as he talked to a journalist about his role in the project's architecture. He'd officially moved to New York 3 months ago, and he and Sarah had rented a small apartment in Park Slope. It was a space that belonged to both of them, decorated with art they'd chosen together, filled with the accumulated details of 2 people building a shared life. This project is remarkable, the journalist said. But what's even more remarkable is the partnership between you two. You work together. You live together. How do you maintain balance? Sarah and Marcus exchanged a glance, a wordless communication that had become easier and easier over the past 9 months. We maintain balance by being honest, Sarah said. We talk about work, about dreams, about fears. We give each other space to grow separately while building something together. And we remember that this relationship isn't a solution to our individual problems. It's an addition to the lives we're already building for ourselves. That's very mature, the journalist said with a smile. After the journalist left, Sarah and Marcus walked through the gallery, looking at the images of the community they'd helped create. Sarah felt the weight of how far she'd come from that desperate woman in the hotel lobby, the one who thought she needed a stranger to pretend to be her husband in order to feel valuable. I've been thinking about something, Marcus said as they paused in front of a particularly striking photograph, a group of children with their hands in the dirt, faces lit up with discovery. Do you remember the night of the reunion? When you asked me if I would pretend to be your husband? Of course I remember, Sarah said. It was one of the most impulsive, desperate things I've ever done. I've been thinking about how different our lives would be if I'd said no, Marcus continued. If I'd walked away from that request, you probably would have gone to that reunion anyway. You would have survived it, and your life would have continued much as it had been. Unhappy, inauthentic, but stable. And if you had said no? Sarah asked. I would have gone back to Portland. I would have continued building my career. And I might have spent the next several years wondering why something always felt like it was missing, Marcus said. I might never have asked myself the hard questions about who I actually am and what I actually want. So, what are you saying? Sarah asked. I'm saying that sometimes the moment that changes your life doesn't announce itself as important, Marcus said. Sometimes it's just a woman asking a stranger for help in a hotel lobby. Sometimes it's someone being brave enough to ask for what they need, and someone else being vulnerable enough to say yes. And from that one moment of mutual vulnerability, everything can shift. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. Are you trying to make me cry in a gallery? Maybe a little, Marcus said with a smile. That evening, they attended a private dinner celebrating the success of the Urban Seeds initiative. Sarah's mother was there, finally understanding that her daughter's career wasn't less important just because it wasn't high-paying. Jennifer Hartley was there too, no longer engaged to Chad Windsor, but starting over. And Sarah found herself feeling genuine compassion for her old rival rather than judgment. During the dinner, Marcus stood to give a toast. I want to acknowledge Sarah, he said, his eyes finding hers across the room. Not just for this incredible project, but for having the courage to ask for help when she needed it, and the wisdom to do the real work of becoming the person she actually wanted to be. Sarah, you came into my life as someone searching for validation, and you've become someone who doesn't need anyone else's approval to know her own worth. I'm honored to be part of your journey,